What are the most promising technologies that might enable net zero skyscrapers in the future? Do you think net zero is really attainable on a wide scale for tall buildings?
I think net zero is certainly attainable for buildings, maybe not necessarily for tall buildings. Tall buildings, by virtue of them being a pretty large operation and mixed use, the area that's available to a tall building doesn't lend itself to take advantage of the site, the amount of solar and what's available to it to make it truly net zero. But given the fact that they're generally, as part of the bigger development, certainly you can have the entire development as net zero.
So the tall building itself, distinguished from the complex or the development of a tall building area, you're making a distinction between what maybe net zero is attainable on those levels.
Right, because they're limited with the amount of, in my opinion, through net zero, take advantage of all the energy that's available to it locally. Really doesn't require anything from outside. So you're limited with the amount of site that you have available for a tall building. And that's where tall buildings bring efficiency for development, because they use least amount of land. And as a result of that, they don't have as much solar available to them. We've done a lot of projects where we've looked at integrated solar panels into the skin of the building to accommodate some sort of a power generation that's sustainable and plays the fact of net zero. A lot of developments can do, as a bigger site, net zero production or purchase their power from the neighborhoods, wind power and other things.
So could be a tall building could be a driving force for net zero development,
Correct.
But maybe not on its own
Correct.
scale.
Yeah.
Okay. So what should be done with the growing stock of mid-century office buildings with low ceiling heights, poor insulation, and outmoded mechanical equipment? What do we do with all these buildings?
I think that's a great area for helping the carbon footprint of the buildings. There are a lot of older buildings that are throughout the world and major cities. They can be repositioned to accommodate other occupancies and extend their life. In fact, Chicago has a very famous program that's currently underway. They started with the Chicago 14. 14 of the older buildings were selected, and the city has somewhat subsidized the process, assisted them with the some sort of a benefit on the studies, and also even financial benefits, TIF funding for some of the developments that kind of facilitated those buildings to reposition themselves and renovate. And as a result, the goal was to achieve 30–40% energy efficiency, which in my opinion is pretty good.
Just by retrofitting existing buildings, though.
Right, right. Older buildings that require upgrade to the systems, upgrade to the wall, and those kind of things can benefit significantly.
What do you think are the main challenges with doing that on a broader scale? I mean, it sounds like Chicago has a program that's moving along, but we're talking, I think there's something like more than 100 cities in China, with more people than Chicago. Most of them newer, but still when they have this large glut of buildings that need retrofitting.
I think there has to be local subsidies, either neighborhood or communities, cities, even countries can accommodate some sort of a benefit in the process to owners and developers and encourage them to participate in the activity and in the upgrading of the systems. I don't believe that the buildings on their own can take that initiative. Chicago has been very successful in that regard. I think there are a lot of buildings that are now online doing this. We can't demo the old, nice buildings. We need to kind of extend their life. So basically, by changing the occupancy in the building and repositioning them, you can accommodate longer life from them, and also you can equalize the community to have mixed-use operations or mixed-use occupancies to liven up the process.
Does the price of energy factor in at all in terms of how to make it, viable or desirable to retrofit an old building?
Not really anymore. I think it used to, but the energy, especially in the United States, the energy is deregulated. So as a large producer, you can go buy your energy anywhere you like. Especially you can purchase your energy through wind generation or other sustainable power. and utility companies required by law to deliver it to you.
Mm-hmm.
So I think energy used to play a big factor, but not anymore.
Hmm.
In other parts of the world, still does. India, Korea, they have very robust regulations for energy use in buildings that needs to still be followed.
Mm-hmm. And do you think
That's
that
dictated by some of the utility rates, utility cost.
is there a role for the utilities there to inspire retrofitting on a large scale?
I believe Korea has some governmental incentives to encourage building developers and owners to operate the building in a way that takes advantage of the best rates. They are required to configure their system so it can take advantage of the best rate structure or best usage structure, as you want to
Mm-hmm.
say it. So more people actually have their cooling generated at night when the electricity is actually lower demand. A lot of people do not require it for lighting and other things, and then they can use it during the day to cool the building.
If you could select a major tall building design, construction, operation, or management topic that still needed more research, what would it be and why?
I think there's a lot of areas in the tall buildings that needs further research. We are limited with systems that are commercially available for tall buildings that can withstand higher pressures. So there are some additional research that needs to be undertaken by either manufacturing group or building design professionals to improve that side of it so we can have taller and taller buildings built. We are basically getting to the limits of the heights that we can effectively distribute chill water, for example, to higher levels. The other method that typically is followed now is you look at the buildings to be as a combination of several high-rise buildings stacked on top of one another. They become more independent on their own to produce their own cooling locally, their own power locally, and those things.
And so the topic you'd like to see more research in, if you had to pick one that was most exciting or most interesting or most needed to explore in tall building research right now?
In my opinion, the limit of the product is one area that I think we need to look at. I know elevator manufacturers looking at the cable technology to allow it to go higher. There are perhaps other areas that we're not seeing a lot of publication on, more feedbacks and from the operation of the building. A lot of tall buildings are built, but nothing's been published about them, what they do, how they perform. I think community can learn a lot from feedback from the operation side of it, more of a facility management side of it.
Chicago has a program in that too, right? Energy
Yes.
benchmarking?
In fact, the benchmarking that I talked about in Chicago that city subsidizes, once they join into the program, they need to report their improvement in the energy. So after a year of operation, they need to have that data available to the community, so telling them, yes, we did this and this and this in our building, and this is what the benefit of it was.
Mm.
So more of a feedback to the community, I think, is going to encourage other buildings to get on the bandwagon and try to do the work.
Tell us just how that would happen exactly, how having information available to the public or to whomever it would be available to would make it more likely that people would take similar measures for their own building.
I think with a lot of older buildings especially, if the community is aware of what was possible and what each operations and building did and how they improved their energy use requirement, what are the tactics that they used, I think the other buildings can learn from that as information that's available to them and be able to implement some of those into their buildings.
So sharing knowledge.
Sharing knowledge, basically. And I think in the case of the tall buildings, sharing knowledge is very important. That's something that's never been done up to now. There are a lot of buildings that are operational, but people keep the information to themselves and not publish it.
Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of it is because they may not want to get publicity or perhaps negative publicity to some extent.
Sure, keep your head down like a lot
Right.
of big businesses do in all sectors.
Exactly, exactly.
Okay, so the Federation of Korean Industries building was named one of CTBUH's top tall buildings in 2014. What do you see as that project's main contribution to the field? Or what did you find most interesting or exciting about it?
Well, I think that was a very exciting project for us. We implemented a lot of new ideas into that building. Codes and local regulations require the buildings produce a certain amount of sustainable energy. So we were able to integrate the photovoltaic system into the exterior wall and optimize it to be able to capture the most sun and optimize it essentially where we wanted to put it on the exterior wall to have the best return for the project. In addition to that, the building has a combined type of chill water production, and it stores water at night for cooling and releases it during the day to basically equalize their use. So during 24 hours, they use the same amount of energy, the same peak impact on the grid during the day and nighttime. By doing that, they are not capturing the power from neighbors. So the city is able to use their infrastructure to be able to distribute the power to more of the development. In addition to that, we did something that was very unique in that project. Is most of the buildings in Korea have water distribution as a central system. We encourage them to look at, for office building, because it has a very limited amount of use for domestic hot water, we encourage them to use a point of use water heaters, which has never been done in Korea. And in fact, our client, the Korean Federation of Korean Industry, they were very excited about it because they saw it as an opportunity. They look at the product. In fact, they're manufacturing that product now in Korea. They use it for the building. So it did something for the local community.
Are high-rises moving fast enough to decarbonize? I've heard, throughout this interview and other places about the wonderful things that Chicago is doing to lead the way in some of these areas. But do you think it's happening fast enough? And what are the main challenges to making sure that we decarbonize, quick enough to avoid the worst effects of climate change?
Well, certainly the newer development in high-rise are not always keeping in mind decarbonization. But I think as a whole, cities with many high-rise buildings offer significant opportunity to try to at least start the road to decarbonization. They're not going to be able to do it on their own. Buildings use approximately 35 to 40% of our energy, and I believe the existing stock has the best opportunity to try to improve the decarbonization goal. If we can improve 30, 40% in energy consumption for existing buildings, we can build a lot of other facilities or buildings throughout the world where where it basically does not impact the infrastructure as a whole. So decarbonization for the tall building developments need to be really a collective effort to holistically look at all development rather than a singular type of approach.